All right, our next concept is on rigid transformation. So rigid just means that the shape doesn't change. So we've got three different types. So I'm going to go through the three different types that you're going to see, just a quick overview, and then I'll show you what you're going to have to do with the coordinates and how to figure out the new coordinates after you do this transformation. So we're going to be working with shapes in the coordinate plane, so you're all done with trigonometry here for the year. So hooray for that, I'm sure you guys are thinking. So anyways, I got a translation. So let's say I have a triangle, and we're going to name that triangle ABC. And we're going to do a translation. A translation is just a slide. And so all we're doing is just moving that triangle somewhere else. We could say, hey, we're going to move it to the left 8 units, and we're just going to move that triangle there. It doesn't change the shape, doesn't change the size, it just changes where it's at. We could go a horizontal translation and a vertical translation. We could go to the left, we could go down, we could do all sorts of things. So a translation, maybe to the left 6 units and down 3 units would maybe look something like this. Just moves. It should be the same triangle. Obviously my drawing is terrible, but you get the idea that the triangle should be the same, just moved. The only difference that we're going to do here is we're going to have a different name for the new shape. So rather than being triangle ABC, we're going to use A prime, B prime, and C prime. So those are like our image. That's the new image after our translation. Okay. We'll look at the notation of that here in a little bit. The next one is a reflection. So let's go ahead and just take a look at a triangle in the same spot, a triangle ABC. There are 2 different reflections we could do that we're going to focus on. The first one would be just a reflection over the x-axis, and it's just going to be a flip. It's going to be a mirror image. So I'm probably looking at something like this. And I'll go A prime, B prime, C prime. So it's just a flip. It's just flipped over. It's a mirror image. My drawings are awful, as you guys all know. But and then we could reflect it over the y-axis as well. And so that would look something like this. So those are just the different reflections you could have. Pretty simple. You guys will be working with some technology to help you actually do the reflections. But ultimately, can you identify it? It's just a flip. Okay. And then our last one is a rotation, and this one's probably the hardest one to work with. And so if we are working with a triangle again, a rotation just means we're spinning it or we're turning it. Usually you're going to turn it around the origin. And so, let's say that I've got a connection there. I might say 90 degrees clockwise. Well, that just means all my points are going to be 90 degrees. And so I end up with a triangle that probably looks fairly similar to what you've got here. But it might be something like this. So again, shape hasn't changed. I'm just rotating it. And we usually do that in degrees, so you might say 90 degrees clockwise, or even 180 degrees. If you do a 360 degrees, that takes you right back to where you started. We'll look at pretty straightforward rotations. Basically, can you identify it? Is it a rotation? Is it a reflection? Is it a translation? So from there, how do we work with the coordinates? And so I'm going to just go through the translation and reflections. Rotations are a little trickier, and we're just going to focus on the 2 simpler ones here while we're working online. So if I started with a quadrilateral here, A, B, C, D, and here are your coordinates. If I was going to do a reflection over the x-axis, remember the x-axis is the horizontal axis. If I'm going to do a horizontal flip, okay, I'm going to flip it over the x-axis. Well, all that changes in those is just going to be the y coordinates. So d prime, this one's pretty easy to do without the actual coordinates, but d prime is going to be right there. And you can see that pretty easily, right? And then c prime was 6, 5. Well, that's just going to go down here. So I'll end up being at 6, negative 5. 6, 4, 2, 3, 4. So c prime is right there. And if you notice, all I'm doing is changing the y coordinate. So b prime would then be 4, negative 5. A prime would just be 2, negative 3. And so I can reflect that fairly easily using my coordinates. I'm going to use my prime notation to tell me my new shape. And even with my terrible drawing skills, you can see the flip pretty easily. Pretty straightforward. If I were to reflect it over the y-axis, I would just change the x-coordinates. Okay? And so usually they'll give you that. They'll say, hey, a reflection over the x-axis. That's just how I would describe that. Okay? So some more notation here is if I was working with a translation. So let's say I had A, B, C, D, and I wanted to do a translation of the following. So here's some notation that you might see. And here's what that tells me. It says I want a translation where I move to the left 6, because x's are my horizontal, left and right. So I'm going to go minus 6. So I'm moving to the left 6. And then plus 1 to my y would just mean I go up 1. So all I'm going to do to find my A prime, B prime, C prime, and D prime would be just to literally do that to those coordinates. So I'm going to go 2 minus 6, negative 4. 3 plus 1 is 4. So really all I'm doing is going 6 places over and 1 place up from where I started. And that's where A prime is going to be. Okay? So I'm going to do the same with all those coordinates. So minus 6, 4 minus 6 is negative 2, 5 plus 1 is 6. 6 minus 6 is 0, 5 plus 1 is 6. 5 minus 6 is negative 1, 1 plus 1 is 2. And I can go ahead and graph all of those coordinates. And then from there, I should have my new image. And it should just be to the left 6 and up 1. So my same shape, didn't change the size at all. Go from there. That's basically all you're doing with this concept. We're only going to do one at a time. You could do multiple, and then you'd end up with a double prime, but we're not going to get into that. Basic rigid transformations where the shape does not change its size or shape. It is just moved or changes orientation. Good luck.